Welcome to our study of the Buddhist psychology of awakening. And the reason we do that, the reason why we're studying the Buddhist psychology of awakening is because as much as Buddhism is the path of enlightenment, knowing all things, enlightenment is premised on the presence or absence of confusion in the mind. So we could say all of reality is naturally free from confusion. The only place, there's one place where there's confusion, and that's in the mind. So that is the reason why at the beginning then of you could say the Buddhist path, we emphasize a lot of understanding how the mind operates. The understanding of the mind, of course, is what we could call the map. And famously, the map is not the territory, but it's very helpful. It's very helpful to have an idea about what we are doing on the Buddhist path. And so the mapping of the mind is really the essential tool. Now, as much as the Buddha could have talked about enlightenment and nirvana right away, and this way the Buddha would probably have been immensely popular and rather sort of objectified as God or something like that. The Buddha really identified the same quality that he had found in his enlightenment as present in every sentient being. And for that reason, the Buddha really never really taught as if he was superior. He taught like a doctor who recognizes that just like he or she could become ill with any particular affliction, then also this is what afflicting others. And so in that sense, the doctor doesn't sit and pontificate being in good health. And likewise, the Buddha doesn't pontificate from the point of view of being enlightened. Simply what the Buddha identified is that there's a condition of cognitive dysfunction that creates a condition of suffering, of disease, of confusion. But the Buddha's point was also this is entirely removable. In some way, we could say the Buddha's teaching is really just that the Buddha encouraged us to just have a look at reality and get out of our heads, so to speak. And reality in and of itself is perfect. The reality in and of itself is free from the confusion that we impose on it. So in the practice of the path, what the Buddha is really just doing is introducing us to reality, and he's not doing that through constructing a new philosophy about how reality is. The primary methodology we operate with in Buddhism is famously meditation, and meditation is settling into a direct connection with reality, but without the usual overlay of philosophy and dogma. We can do that. This is, of course, you could say the provocative aspect of Buddhism, that we see ourselves as capable of being fully present with ourselves and with the world without the overlay of attitudes and so forth, which are then understood as really being the product of confusion. And so to remove what it is that prevents us from relating directly to reality, then there is a path. And that's where it's quite helpful to identify where confusion stems from. And it should first of all be said that confusion stems from an innocent condition. Like I said before, it's a cognitive dysfunction. It's just that we've gotten a little bit dizzy. We're a little bit out of it. And all the Buddha really wants us to do is just come back to being properly present. The Buddha is not going to tell us what we're supposed to see, what's the nature of reality. It's a bit like if you have a fever and you recover from the fever, you might recover on the basis of somebody looking after you, putting cold towels on your forehead or somehow looking after you while you have a fever. But once you're well, the person or the doctor doesn't tell you what you now should experience now that you're no longer hallucinating, or now you're no longer having a fever. And so likewise, the Buddha is just nursing us into recovery. He doesn't tell us what we're supposed to then see. But in the process of this nursing into recovery, yes, something has to be done, and that operates at the level of the cognitive, the mind, etc. And so when we engage in the practice of meditation, we do so with a little bit of an awareness of where this is heading. And if meditation was just going into ourselves and essentially consolidating our existing psychology, we wouldn't really ever get over it. But we would still perpetuate the same old patterns that drive our confusion and our suffering. So that's where in the Buddhist teaching, there's a little bit where the Buddha says, try and have a look at what you assume is this most delicate part of your entire being, which is this insecure sense of me, and making me, myself, I, mine, etc., the center of the universe. And this, of course, is normal, we could say, but it is also the reason why it's normal that we suffer. And we see that we are, in fact, far happier when we relinquish this grip on me and mine. And we suffer when we are more sort of catering to self-centering and selfishness. So in the context of studying then this text, we've really looked at how all our experience is very constructed in terms of basically subject and object. Particularly, we would say we operate with this notion of we have particular faculties through which we sense the world around us. And in dealing with that, then we have the objects that are we perceiving. There's the perceiving organs, for example, eye, hearing, visual. We have the visual that we see with our eyes. We have the sound that we hear with our ears, etc., the five senses, and then also the mind. But all of these operate with the notion of a faculty that perceives an object. Now, in addition with that, then we have within ourselves the experience of a consciousness that is generated on the basis of subject, the faculty, and then the perceiving consciousness. So we have these three dimensions, and these three dimensions then operate on the level of the five senses and also the mind. So we have essentially these six divisions that operate in terms of the object, the perceiving faculty, and then the consciousnesses that are generated. So we've looked at this, we call it the 18 dhatus, but the point really is to begin to identify how our experience is constructed. Everything that we experience, we very often are just stuck in a condition of like, dislike, and then we begin to generate narratives around good, bad, and so forth, and we have our various psychological moods or various psychological states on the basis of that. But all of these really revolve around this continual field of experience that can then be analyzed and seen to be constituted. And it's not so much that we need to learn the 18 faculties or the this and the that's, but it's more that we understand that it's constituted, it's created on the basis of various factors. So it's not just that we have one feeling. We have one feeling, but very often our feeling is just about me and my feeling. And very often we become very sensitive around these feelings, and we're not necessarily constructive in that regard. We very often become very reactive in terms of being attached to good feelings, very negative about bad feelings. And we always operate being essentially victims of this continually choosing this over that. And so our relationship with reality is very much a continual process of censorship. We're not really comfortable with the world unless it exactly goes our way. And that is where we suffer. And we could then say, well, I should decide not to be fussy. I should be easygoing. But that's easier said than done. And while something like meditation is very helpful, and there's a lot we can do, there's a very provocative dimension in the Buddhist teaching, which is saying that all these constituted phenomena, they in fact have no inherent existence because there is no solid essence to it. It's all just shifting conditions. And that's really, you could say, the lion's roar, if you like, of the Buddhist teaching, understanding this thing we call dependent arising. So we've looked a little bit at the various these various dhatus, and Steven has guided us through this in terms of identifying this in terms of sort of essentially what he calls dhatu analysis. And now we are looking more at a much more immediate identification of then the conditions of our mind. How basically what we sometimes in the modern world refer to as ego, how ego works. And to understand ego, we're not really looking at something abstract. It's probably the most immediate experience we have. But there's a big difference between the mind of a sage, the mind of the Dalai Lama, the Buddha, etc., and also intrinsically our ground nature, and then this experience of the afflicted mind, the ego, where ego does figure very prominently within all our decisions, all our choices, our policy making, and so forth. So there's a fair bit of value in identifying ego. Now, ego sometimes sounds as if it's the whipping boy of Buddhism. Ego is bad. And sometimes we unfortunately think, well, I am ego, ain't I? Then am I bad? And so on. That's not really the point. It's more that we have sensitive egos, and we could have a lot of sympathy for the condition of ego. But it is essentially a delusional condition. So we're kind of teasing out a very clear understanding of what constitutes ego, what's the experience of ego, from the point of view that we'd actually like to objectify it sufficiently so that we could possibly give it a hard look. It's not just something that's operating in the dark, undetected, festering in the shadows, etc. So that's where there's a discussion here around ego, where last time we looked at 4 aspects of how we're always fearing particular conditions. We fear pain, we fear loss, we fear blame, we fear bad reputation. All of these, we could say, are completely normal. So there's not any kind of, incrimination of the working of ego. It's normal that we fear loss. It's normal that we have all of these. But they are, nevertheless, they constitute what we, in Buddhism, and which is actually a lot less rude, really, than the word ego, is what we just say, fixating on a self. And ego, well, it sounds sort of, it sounds basically negative. In the Buddhist context, this whole condition is not really seen in terms of bad. It's just like a condition. It's a curable condition that we need to be aware of. And so this fixating on a self, it plays out in terms of these scenarios. So we look at ego, or identify ego, through what we call the 8 worldly dharmas, the 8 ways in which ego has certain fears and certain hopes. So we can all identify with that, but we can also at the same time also see that it's with the transcending of this that we actually begin to become increasingly more free. So where we generally operate with hoping for pleasure, the sage operates more with understanding that pleasure might come, and not necessarily being worried about having pleasure, but also not being worried about not having pleasure. And that's where we can see that there's a certain uptightness that takes place there, where we can see there is an afflicted condition. So it makes sense to begin to be quite clear on these 8 aspects of essentially fear and then also hope. So Steven writes, we can guess what the other 4 are. So we've looked at the fear of loss, fear of a number of things, and essentially the next 4 will just be the opposite. He says, but it's good to remember that from the moment we wake up in the morning until we go to bed at night, we're hoping for pleasurable situations, physically and mentally. We make a plan. These are the pleasurable things that I want to accomplish today, physically and mentally. So of course we could say, well, that's normal, but it's a little bit as if we woke up saying, I want dessert for the whole day. And as we go up, we sort of realize that there's going to be occasional dessert. We also have to eat the greens. We also have to essentially put out into order to receive, etc. That we begin to have a wider perspective that goes just beyond the immediate gratification. That is the sort of primitive, you could say, mode of operation of ego. And so from that point of view, we hope to increase that physical and mental pleasure, and we don't want to delay it. Hoping for pleasure, the counterpart to fearing pain, takes up a lot of time. That's where we're essentially coming from. So we, particularly in the modern world, of course, the whole ethos of the modern world, and particularly the economy, is geared towards us being addicted to immediate gratification. It's not that this book here, for example, it was bought with 1 click on Amazon. The Kindle, I don't have to wait for it to come in the mail. I get it right away. So there you are, a click away from immediate gratification. And a lot of the economy is based on that. Steven makes the point here, he says almost all advertising is a way of trying to make people spend money according to what they imagine will give them pleasure. And of course, good advertisers know that people need to be educated. They know that people don't really know what they want, so they have to be told. And they have to be shown ways in which a particular product, this thing that we can see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think about, or feel, will make them happier if they buy it. That means the advertisers understand very well something about the nature of mind in a relative way. They know that this holding pattern can be educated. It can be influenced. We might say that our education is the training and controlling of this holding pattern. So there's so many examples. Recently, somebody was telling me about some doco that identifies how in the I don't know, some decades ago, the whole notion of brands became very, very it became clear that people began to identify with particular brands, and the producers of particular products, they began to really be skillful in being identified with particular brands. This is, of course, not new, but what was new was that people began to actually have an increased sense of their identity as being hooked up with particular brands. So anyway, this obviously, this is, we could say, is normal, but some of us also might have cottoned on to the corrupt nature of this and the weakness that essentially is that we are playing on a particular weakness. It's not really that intelligent. And that's where we're not about us no longer buying things or being part of this game, but it's more just that we begin to become wary of it. And particularly here, we are onto this condition of ego as essentially a delusional condition where we tend to get fooled. Our continual drive towards, you could say, gratification, it renders our intelligence weak. It actually leads us to failing to appreciate the world as it is, and very much into a sort of a narrow attempt to try to control the circumstances. So Steven says, sometimes the desire to control the holding pattern doesn't work. The Buddhist teachings talk about turning away from being fascinated by the spectacle of control, which does not correspond to the real situation. They talk about turning the mind away from such engagement, which involves overthrowing the dictatorship of false views that reinforce this tightness. So false views is not really a sort of a regime of particular dogmas. It's really just our own naivete that continually buys into this, and that's where we are subject of a particular control that's being exerted over us. It's not really that difficult to overthrow it, or it's more just that we begin to be wary of it, that we're attentive to it, and that is the beginning of prajna. That is the beginning of wisdom. And of course, we cultivate this through meditation, essentially discovering autonomy that's not necessarily caught up with this. But it is helpful for us to be privy to and onto this deception that's continually taking place. So Steven continues, it is said that the way to provoke a revolution at the level of our attitude is to engage in the following 4 thoughts. Okay. Now this is a little bit of a diversion from, well, maybe not. This might have been there in the original Abhidharma teaching, but it's certainly something that's not present within our ordinary worldview. Because most of us, those of us who are reading this book, we belong to the human race, and most of us think that, well, the human race, that's just what there is, that's us. But it is, in fact, if we look at all the various life forms, it is a very small part of all life. There's countless ants, presumably on these 20 acres where I'm living here. Then there are uncountable millions and billions of little creatures that all of them are actually sentient life. They're all sentient beings. There was a little somebody crawling on me before. That's just one out of probably a billion of such insects that are living just on this particular lot of land. To be human is it's a sentient condition. It's being a sentient being, but it's just one of countless varieties of sentient beings. It's a very small portion of all life. And so to have a human body, to be able to work constructively with it, like we're supposedly doing here, this is something that's extremely rare. So we talk about the rarity of the human situation. So this is where why this is something that sort of provokes a revolution at the level of our attitude, is because as long as we're still engaged in this confusion, to be born a human is not necessarily just a granted condition, and particularly if we get stuck very much in states of aggression or states of attachment or states of just not being particularly conscious, it's not necessarily a given that we are born as humans. So as long as we still have this dualistic notion of I, the object of self, and the object of phenomena and so on, like we looked at earlier, as long as we're still caught up in this delusional fixation, this insecurity of self, then we go through so many lifetimes, and it's only some of these lifetimes that in fact are human. So that's where what we have right now is really an opportunity to be free. So having that rare, precious opportunity, then the second contemplation is think deeply about how this precious, rare situation won't last forever. And that's, of course, something that all Buddhists, they meditate on, impermanence. It's one of these, for me, one of the most interesting contemplations, because it's one of these things that are only so obvious, and yet it's one of these things that I just don't seem to get into my head. I just can't still seem to be really understanding that I'm getting wrinkles, I'm losing my hair. That's just not happening. So that's where we kind of fail. We fail. It's only too obvious impermanence happens, and yet it's only too obvious that we're not really sort of willing to accept it. So that's where this actually constitutes a contemplation, because considering how dense we are, then certainly myself, then I need to reflect on this situation of being alive, thinking, and being able to work constructively with my conditions is not a situation that is going to last forever. And then Stephen says, think deeply about how the most important pattern in this precious existence is the way in which our mind goes. And it goes in two ways, of wholesome or unwholesome karma. So with that, we mean essentially that which is driven by confusion and ego, and that which isn't. Wholesome and unwholesome, we could say, might indicate some sort of moralism, and to some extent it does, but it's really just what is going to generate ultimately happiness and what's ultimately going to generate suffering. So certain actions, they naturally generate suffering, and certain actions just naturally generate lightness and happiness. So then we have these two kind of styles of actions, or what we call karma. Wishing for happiness to increase, which comes on the basis of it comes due to wholesome karma and will always bear fruit as ease and well-being, or wishing that happiness would be blocked or decrease, which is unwholesome karma that will always bear fruit as pain and frustration. So this is not as if there's somebody up there sitting up there saying, okay, you're good, you're bad, you're going to be punished, you're going to be rewarded favors and so on. It's essentially just how we construct ourselves, but we can be very unskillful in constructing some painful scenarios for ourselves. And we can also be intelligent about constructing scenarios that are that give happiness. Okay, question? Seeking pleasure and seeking well-being, it's that similar to wholesomeness and unwholesome. Well-being doesn't always mean it's pleasurable. Yeah, well, this is where we're on to essentially we're beginning to become discerning, because seeking pleasure on the basis of wisdom, knowing what's going to really be helpful for us, it's a bit like choosing to eat good food rather than just eating Danish pastry. So that's where we could be discerning, and one thing is going to do us good and the other thing isn't. And that's essentially what Stephen is talking about here. So that's where just getting what we want doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be well. So that's where this discerning is coming into play, and that's where to be discerning, we need to identify then the project, which is discerning what is driven by ego and what isn't. So in this context, then we're looking at the unique condition we have being a human, knowing that it won't last forever, knowing that we are essentially subject to the patterns that we lay down. And then the final one here is where Stephen says, think deeply about the unsatisfactoriness of samsara. So samsara doesn't mean the world. Samsara means our construction of the world. It's our limitation or our diminishing of the world into our particular way of seeing it. That's again where we can see the sage is at ease, no matter where he or she might be, enjoys life. Whereas how the degree to which we are increasingly held by ego, then also we have this increasing condition of unsatisfactoriness. So that's where we would understand that as long as we are unconsciously driven by ego, driven by ignorance, driven by confusion, then we are stuck within this cycle, this dualistic cycle, where we inevitably are suffering. So, says Stephen, we're told to reflect that the lifestyles that flow from our tight habit patterns, which are dominated by aggression, acquisition, or ignorance, are really not worth pursuing. So that's putting it politely. It just doesn't work. As long as we're held up in this uptightness and perpetuating particular patterns, then when it's particularly these patterns that are dominated by aggression, acquisition, ignorance, then it's not fun, and it's a pattern that unless we extract ourselves from the ignorance that drive these patterns, then we're going to be stuck in these patterns. So that's where we'd want to be determined to be free. So that's with regards to hope for pleasure. Okay, hope for gain. Yeah, that's a question here. More Tibetan medicine and less Danish pastry then. Yep, way to go. Okay. Even though Tibetan medicine is famously very bitter. Have any of you tasted Tibetan medicine?
Yeah.
Tastes terrible. But it's good for us. Yes, we like it. Hope for gain. In addition to spending a lot of time hoping for increased pleasure, the fifth pattern, the one we just looked at, we try to gain new things that accord with our nature. More things to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, many new things to think about that we like, many things to feel. This is the sixth. Basically just that we want stuff. We want stuff, and we want all sorts of things that consolidate and boost our acquisitions and our sense of safety on the basis of all these things that we hope to gain or that we want to look after. Then there's hope for praise. So the seventh is that we focus our hopes on people praising us. We're very clever at putting ourselves in situations where people will say nice things to us. We want to be right in that place where something nice is happening, and then people will think it had something to do with us. So this is where we always we drop little hints at the excellence of something in particular that has to do with what we did, and then we then reap the praise. Steven says, so we plot ways to have praise occur. We all know we will feel good, but actually we will only feel good if it is genuine praise. So we plot all kinds of artificial situations in order to provoke the semblance of genuine and natural praise. Again, this is something where certainly I go through life very often admiring people that just do things and don't require any kind of recognition. I'm always full of admiration for people like that, aware of my own sort of vanity and addiction to being praised. And then there's hope for fame. And the eighth is that we try to manipulate our press. We're always hiring a public relations agent who broadcasts out and leaves pamphlets, brochures, write-ups, and blurbs about how wonderful we are. Have you noticed that when we write a curriculum vitae, there is a bit of selection process? We put the points in there that will attract and fascinate and make people want to praise us and need us. So the eighth is hoping and planning for ways in which history will remember us in a good way. So of course, one thing is to write a CV where we are obviously having to market ourselves, but there is also this tendency of vanity that actually would want us to be famous, recognized citizens. So it's also interesting. Sometimes I remember my dad actually. My dad didn't really have. My dad was like to say he was agnostic in terms of religion, what happens after death, and so forth. But he would say this complete and utter rubbish, which was really his philosophy. I said, what's going to happen if you die, Dad? And he says, well, that's kind of nice, but it's absolute rubbish. It has nothing to do with what our individual consciousness is going to be experiencing, just as much as what people are talking about. Really, of course, we could say to people saying things about us, etc., etc. But ultimately, it doesn't really have anything to do with our further journey. So that's where this fame thing really just again comes back to a way that where we can identify our ego, our vanity, and essentially also our insecurity. So these are called worldly dharmas. They're called the 8 worldly dharmas. And sometimes these are, these are very often, they are seen as essentially pitfalls. They're the pitfalls of ego. And one thing we talked about it the other day, but there's one line in which where Milarepa is one great sage's guru. He appears to Milarepa in a vision. And Milarepa, he's having a hard day. He's living on a diet of green nettles, and he's been doing that for a few years. So he's emaciated, he's weak, he's just been outside. He's he's so weak that as he's gathering firewood, the wind blows him over. So he's feeling rather depressed, and so he starts supplicating his guru. And his guru appears on a cloud in front of him, and one of the things he says, just to encourage Milarepa in his practice, he says, "What's happening with you? Are the winds of the 8 worldly dharmas, are they blowing around in your cave?" And essentially what he wants Milarepa is to really get over these conditions of rather his reliance on comfort and so forth. It's not as if Milarepa's lifestyle was particularly indulgent, living in a cave as he was, but still his teacher wants him to go even further. So that is where he highlights Milarepa's Milarepa still has some work to do in terms of his path. So these worldly dharmas, they're very real for us. And Steven says these 8 factors, these way of proceeding, are motivations that are called worldly because they keep us in samsara. They are ways of avoiding the spiritual revolution. So in fact, everything that is said about our ego or self can be rethought as consisting entirely of these 8 worldly motivations. So these again, we can remember them just simply in hope and fear. These are when our motivation is based in either hoping for something or fearing something. Of course, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be possibly apprehensive, or we should preempt difficulties and so on. That's not the point. But it's more that where we can see that we become very vulnerable, and we're not just seeing things in terms of how they are, but we're very much seeing things in terms of how they are for us. So again, it comes back to this self-centering. So on the basis of this insight, one might do a retreat. Okay, you make the retreat as you would normally do. Imagine reflecting in your journal on moments that you remember that fall into these 8 motivations. If you do it with a bit of spaciousness, this is a kind of shamatha helper. It's not depressing or bad news when you discover this is what you're doing. So it's a bit like if we have a dream journal. You know, we might when we wake up write down what happened in our dream. And similarly, also, if we could be what we would want to do here is beginning to note down when we're driven by these 8. Of course, we could say these occur in every moment of our existence to some extent, but we could, just writing them down, begin to be more conscious. So that's also where Steven then says, it's not depressing or bad news when you discover this is what you're doing. It explains why you are sometimes exhausted at the end of the day. You set your view with practicing in the morning, and then the day begins. Time for 8 worldly dharmas, time for me. At the end of the day, it's enough to remember this. What situations did I have today in which I was trying to avoid physical or mental pain? How was I planning for and successful in increasing pleasure? You can have your 8 worldly dharmas journal. Don't show it to anyone, just reflect. You don't have to be obsessive about this, trying to catch which of the 8 you are in while you're walking around. It's enough to know that this is the hope and fear machine, the dual piston that fires our little motor car down the little worldly path. It is enough to know that, and then at the end of the day, just reflect, then rest. Okay? So again, this is not about incriminating us, saying that we're bad because we have hope and fear, but it's just beginning to cotton on to what it is that really holds us. So it's really just beginning to shine a light on what really operates at the very, very most intimate level of our patterns of reacting to our circumstances. But it is the place also where we begin to see the nature of ego. So, of course, the thing about ego, like I said earlier in the Buddhist teaching, is we don't actually see ego as being a big black demon. The ego is not something that truly exists. It's just a cognitive dysfunction. It's a hallucination. It's an assumption. It's something that we are held by, but it's also not something it's also something that's unreal. And that's where the more we get free of that, the better we have it. The more we are held by it, the more we're uncomfortable. So the more that we could actually shine a light on this, the better we ultimately will be off, the freer we will be. So this is where we can't really come to the Buddhist teaching in terms of just saying, okay, I'd like a portion of Buddhist teaching that's going to make me feel good. It's a bit like if we like to smoke and then we go to the doctor and we'd like the doctor to say, oh, you're fine, and keep smoking. If we're out of breath and we're wheezing and generally not well, then we'd like to go, somebody says, oh, you should get it, you're not well because you smoke. And I say, no, I'm fine. Then we go to the doctor and we hope he's going to say that, oh yeah, you're fine, just keep smoking. But it's not really like that. So coming to the Buddhist teaching is that we're identifying that there is something that's going on that's not particularly helpful for our ultimate happiness. But again, it's workable. It's never going to be something about battling against ourselves or any of that. It's not going to be like some sort of suppression of what we really want. You like ice cream, well, you will have no more ice cream. It's not really like that. But it is about seeing through the delusional condition. So Steven says, now who is doing all that? It is mind. Maybe this is an important factor to investigate. We can now investigate in some detail with a bit of precision, which is what the Abhidharma traditions have said about the variety of ways in which mind operates. Okay. So bitter as a medicine is best for the heart, according to traditional Chinese medicine. Okay. So beautiful, love it. Okay. Okay. The Buddha is tough love. Conditioned and unconditioned elements. I don't know. We could have a discussion here about this, or I could go on, but let me just see here. I was actually not planning on going beyond this today, but anyway, any comments, reflections?
If you go back, cycle back a little bit, I was a bit confused about the karma of wanting the opposite, like the previous section for that. Yeah, into one more. Yeah, this part.
Yeah.
So what's the part wishing that happiness could be blocked or decreased? Are the same people are actively wishing for that? Those kind of classes?
Yeah, that is kind of odd. I think okay, the question is what is this wishing that happiness would be blocked or decreased? Who would want that, right? That's the question.
I mean, I could imagine people wouldn't be thinking deeply enough about their choices and not recognize the fact that they were doing, but to openly champion for that feels a bit funny to suggest.
Yeah, I suspect Steven is intending to suggest that he's suggesting that obviously people's actions are destructive.
Right.
And so he's simply just saying, it seems that they wish, it's a little bit sort of being facetious, saying, you obviously wish to be unhappy, you're whatever your choice is.
You're choosing to smoke.
That's right. You're choosing to smoke or gorge on what's unhealthy or whatever. So yeah, you clearly want to block your own happiness. That sort of thing. I guess I think that's what I think so. Yeah, that's how I interpret it. Yeah. So I feel that as we get older, the worldly dharmas have less and less hold on us. Yes, maybe it's the realization that everything goes pear-shaped sooner or later. Or maybe we're becoming more and more drawn to solitude, grumpy old man or woman, or wisdom dawning. Well, let's hope it's wisdom dawning, eh? Because of course, yeah, as the senses, as we're getting less excited about things that used to excite us a whole lot, it could just be that our faculties are getting they're getting slower and duller. So it's not necessarily that we're getting wiser. But of course, it is interesting, and I mean, this is where, for example, Tsongtse Rinpoche, he says, you can't fix samsara. Samsara just doesn't work, and he always gives. Oh, he doesn't always, but I remember him giving one rather comical example, which is the stacking of the strawberries. So there we are, sort of at the end of a good meal, and we're playing around with our dessert. And we can sort of put one strawberry on top of the other. We can maybe put the third strawberry on top, but it just doesn't work. It always falls down. And that is a bit the way that we naively pursue the assumption that maybe we could eke out a little bit of happiness on ego's terms. Trungpa, he says that we're always saving a little space for ego somehow in our spiritual pursuit. It might be ever so courageous and compassionate and dedicated to wisdom and so forth. But there's always there very often is a little place where we're eking out, I'd like this for myself, you know? And so as much as I have a sort of a grand vision and dedication to all of humankind and so forth, then there's a little place that I'd want just for me. And that is actually when we're coming from the place that we don't have the realization that these things, they do go pear-shaped. So so we could say, if we have realization, wisdom dawning, that's great. But just becoming grumpy old men and women doesn't mean that we're becoming wise, particularly, or that we're wanting solitude. You know, go away, don't bother me, that kind of thing. So, so yes, that doesn't necessarily mean that we've gotten to the bottom of things. Then it's just dormant there. Then we would say it's still okay on the level of who we are. It lies at the ego and its need for various styles of gratification is still dormant within our, what we call alaya vijnana, or the all consciousness, and that'll just pass on to the next life. So then once our faculties are coming back, you know, then the same old patterns will be there. Then here someone says, it seems to me that the mentioned practice of reflecting before rest is due to hope and fear in some sense. And this kind of reflection might generate more hope and fear. I would prefer to pray. I would prefer to pray. Is it too lazy? Well, prayer is fine, but you know, then again, our prayers could be very much premised on ego. We could say, may all good things come to me. And prayer is much more powerful, really, when prayer is directed on that which is beyond me. May there be peace in the world. May those to whom I care for, may they be happy, and so on. So prayer is always much more powerful when it goes beyond just the ordinary agenda of me. Then again, we do pray, and we do lay down conditions for things to eventuate for us. So I mean, prayer does work, but what we're onto here is actually something much greater, which is seeing through the whole agenda of self. And that's where we need to initially establish the absence of self. And to do that, we first need to bring out the self so we can really see it for what it is. So that's where keeping a journal on how we're being held by these hopes and fears, or at least being conscious of it, that provides us for a clear picture of what it is that we need to deal with. It gives us some sense of what the enemy is. The enemy is not really conducting guerrilla warfare. It's sort of out in the open, so we can see it. So that's where this journal is probably quite helpful. You're welcome. Okay, let's have a look at what comes next. The conditioned and unconditioned elements. Okay. Yeah. The unconditioned, I think it's the three last ones here. Well, we'll see what they are, but I think they are generally understood in terms of that which is not constructed in any way, but I also think it does refer to, certainly one of them refers to liberation altogether, moksha or freedom. The others have more to do just with what we go through in terms of our ordinary experience. So, okay, here Steven says, our famous list of 75 factors is, according to Vasubandhu's Treasury of Higher Dharma, the Abhidharma Kosha, considered a full and complete chart of everything that can go on for a living being. And every one of us is inherently born with all 75 factors. Within that chart, we can identify two basic patterns called conditioned elements and unconditioned elements. I think we're going to mainly spend time on the conditioned elements. But hey, now when we say the 75, again we might think, wow, do I really need to know all of these? Well, it's kind of like knowing, getting familiar with the periodic table. In physics, if you're going to know something about the world, and you might not choose to particularly become an engineer or scientist, etc., or physicist, but you just know that these 100. How many are there now?
Well, the main ones that are still were only about 75 or 80, but then they have exotic ones that go out to about 103.
Okay, so we have
the ones that are interesting, maybe about 75.
Okay, we have the interesting ones around 75, and then it goes up to, I remember it went up to over 103 when I was a kid. And then you keep getting.
So they're created in laboratories and they last for a millisecond or so. So someone can put their name on it.
Yeah. So you have some sort of very exotic ones there.
Oh, polonium. I mean, you had Einsteinium.
Yeah, exactly.
Californium and Berkeleyium.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's fun. It's kind of a game.
I sense some sense of need for praise or fame.
There you are.
Fame. We can detect fame there in Californium, Berkeleyium.
You see where they're accumulating more than other places.
Yeah.
Certain energy around grabbing some intellectual achievement.
Gosh, don't they have Copenhagen? Anyway. Look, so we operate with sort of a worldview that we have a number of elements that are basic to us. But as we look at these, we'll be able to recognize a lot of familiar faces, so to speak, a lot of familiar patterns and so forth. And again, while we don't need to know all of them, the fact is our reality is really constructed of all these different factors. So the more we actually choose to understand these, the more we are aware of them, then also the less grip they have on us. Okay, so the conditioned elements. So Steven says that the chart on this page. Okay, let's just click on that. I'm wondering if it's the one I have here. Is it that one? Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the one we looked at earlier. Hold on, let me just bring it up. So the chart on this page shows conditioned elements that consist of columns 1, forms, 2, mind, 3, concomitant mental factors. This is just what we go through in terms of moods and so on. And then 4, elements neither substantial forms nor mental functions. Okay. These, I think, are sometimes referred to as non-associated conditional factors. Non-associated conditional factors, yeah. Anyway, so as far as these columns 1, 2, 3, and 4 goes, everything there in there is conditioned, meaning subject to cause and effect, or to put it another way, impermanent. So all of these things where we have form sort of all these various both organs and their objects, they're all things that are conditioned in some way. Mind is also conditioned. And when we look at these general factors, primary wholesome factors, these are also things that are conditioned. So they work with cause and effect. So being conditioned, being constituted, being composed, or they are they are impermanent. And this impermanent is not some vague thing. It means rather precisely that there will be a coming into being, a birth, something happens. We're, for example, as individuals, we're born, right? Then we're equipped with eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, etc. And so that's where we have an experience of coming into this life, and then we're gradually coming out of it. So that's where we have a birth. There will be a stabilization so that this pattern will endure for a while. That's what we call this life. And then there will be a breakup, decay, and dissipation, 68. And that, of course, also applies to Danish pastry and, the seasons that come and go and so forth, where we, we operate with the phenomenon, but it's only here for a while. So this is true of everything called conditioned. According to the Buddhist tradition, there is no one who is creating these factors. It is simply the nature of these factors to sometimes come together into a kind of coherent vibrational pattern, to stay around for a while, to dissipate and to break up. This is rather significant because this departs from the notion that we often have that somebody's behind this. And while we would say that all of these realities that we experience, whether it's this table or my body or my particular mood or whatever it might be, the government and so on, all of these things, we might think that there's people behind them. But the thing is, even the people that we might identify behind them, the men in black, right? And all sorts of, conditions that might be there. These are all just conditions that come together. They're immensely complex systems. But the thing is, there's not some creator. And also, we would say they're not completely random. So we are not saying that things just happen to fall together. They come together exactly on the basis of the actions behind. So on the basis of, let's say, the electorate or whatever, particular governments are put into place on the basis of particular wishes. People might create something, particular things in their lives. They might build houses, pursue careers, marry, have children, etc. And there's all these different realities that people engage with, and they shape their reality. So what we do matters. But at the same time, these also are conditions that come together. Once they're together, they last only for a while, and then they decay. So we have this web of conditions which are essentially operate on the basis of cause and effect. But because they operate on the basis of cause and effect, there's also no solid reality to these. So that's a little bit about conditioned factors. What is it? Conditioned elements. Yeah. Okay, any questions? Otherwise, we'll dedicate. Okay. This came up today on my Google desktop. It's in Tibet. Somewhere in Tibet, Rao, it's called. I don't know where in Tibet, but it looks nice. Yeah. Huh? No, I don't know. Rao, it said, but then the way they spell it, you don't really know what they mean. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish, evermore and more. Thank you. We'll have a 2-minute break and then we'll look at meditation. Okay, welcome. All right, a little bit about meditation. Meditation is the wonderful thing about Buddhism, because that's where we actually are encouraged to really just explore and allow ourselves to be what we truly are. And the implication of everything we just studied is that we get ourselves into a little bit of a tizzy or delusion. And so the point with meditation is actually that once we identify how we actually tend to get a little bit confused and not quite get you could say, our sums right. Somehow our assumptions are a bit flawed. Once we begin to be aware of that, then the interesting thing is we're not yet, to some extent, there is an emphasis on that we should correct ourselves. You know, there's an emphasis on discipline, there's an emphasis on a number of things. But the bottom line is that even if there's an emphasis on discipline, it's really just doing what you want to do and not do what you don't want to do. So, I mean, when we say discipline, that essentially just means not harming others. That's really the essence of Buddhism, as Buddhist discipline, not harming other people. But also, it also means not harming ourselves. So it could be, yes, we could say there's discipline in, for example, in not smoking. There's discipline in eating healthy and all of that. That's discipline. That's intelligent action. For some people, it might be absolutely a straitjacket to have to, cut down on the smokes or cut down on the calories or whatever. So they might think, oh, discipline is just unbearable. Don't tell me what I can eat and not eat, that sort of thing. But at the same time, I think most of us also appreciate that there's something intelligent about certain ways of action that are helpful and ultimately much more bring much greater happiness. So there is some degree of behavior involved, sure, but at the same time also, because our natural condition really is uncorrupted, the more we actually connect with our innate muscle of wisdom, our innate intuition, our innate sanity, the more we're, or rather the less we're held by our neurosis, our habitual ways of doing things, the happier we actually are naturally without even have to have a rule book. The practice of meditation is enabling us to be more in connection with reality. And again, from the Buddhist point of view, reality is naturally perfect. It's just that we're not getting onto reality. We're sort of stuck in our own private version of reality, which is, it's like we've just been looking at, very much centered around self and an insecurity of self, a delusional condition. The more that we break out of that and be sensitive to a greater reality, the better off we are. But we're not at any time constructing anything. And so that's where the practice of meditation is a place where we're not really tampering with our experience. Interestingly enough, and despite what, for example, some traditions of, you could say, skillful methods, they of course, while they might look as if they have a particular methodology, that these methodologies are not absolute. And what really all the various Buddhist methodologies only have this single objective of eliminating our confusion and allowing our natural disposition to blossom. That's all we're doing. We might sometimes have methods, for example, meditation in itself. That is a method, but it's not that ultimately we are developing a new addiction to meditation. We are actually. That's not true. We are actually trying to become addicted to meditation, but just for the time being, until we're enlightened. But then again, beyond enlightenment, there's no real need for meditation. And there's also the implication that what we're cultivating in meditation is something we carry with us beyond meditation. But again, the point of meditation is it's allowing ourselves a place where we could truly be what we are. To sit down and be calm is not exactly imposing some sort of alien regime on ourselves. And the wisdom that comes out of meditation is also natural to us. It's not something that we're imposing or cultivating or artificially generating. Of course, we might say we become wiser through the practice of meditation. We might say that qualities might arise from meditation, but they're just qualities that arise because they were always there. So we're really just providing a condition in which what was always there can become manifest. So in terms of how we actually do this, we sit still. Like I said before, it's not as if we ultimately are going to be promoting some idea of it that sitting still has ultimate value, but it's very, very helpful. If we sit still, we become more present within our life, our existence. We become more present. So sitting is not really violating ourselves, or even though we might fidget a bit. In Buddhist meditation, actually, we sit still and don't fidget, not because fidgeting is particularly wrong, but it's more just that we'd want to fully experience our physicality, and actually sitting perfectly still doesn't have to be 100%, but just aligning ourselves in terms of sitting properly still enables us to have a grounding. It does us good. It provides the foundation for what we call samadhi, where we could actually go deeper in terms of our experience of our being and our whole existence. So in that way, there's a lot of empowerment that's present within the practice of sitting still. It's really, and it's also going places that we normally don't. With our restlessness, we miss out on a whole dimension of our being, physical being, but also the psychological being in terms of our body and mind being very interlinked. So that's where the practice of sitting still is not just sort of putting ourselves in a straitjacket or limiting ourselves. It's really just opening up for a dimension of calm in which things can flourish. And so grounding ourselves, settling and sitting has, from the time of the Buddha down to the present day, been very much part of the Buddhist practice. But as we can hear, it's not about not doing anything, being passive. It's very much being proactive. It's very much taking into account the nature of who we are, giving ourselves, you could say, the best conditions. So that's the first point, and that's where we sit in a particular way. Or if you ask how well we sit like the Buddha sat, and we have Buddha statues, if you like, that's pretty much how we could sit. But then again, in terms of the highlighting the really important aspects of sitting, the main thing is really that the spine is straight and that we carry ourselves with our lower back, that we have some tonicity in terms of how we sit. So that's where we sit straight with our back. We don't have to sit on the floor. In fact, in our culture, we don't normally sit on the floor. Here, there are people who've done yoga who might be comfortable sitting on the floor, but I'm always surprised how many people actually do sit on the floor. I'm a little bit of an anomaly myself. That's that's just because I've ended up spending a lot of my life really just sitting on the floor. But honestly, it's not a cultural practice, so it's absolutely fine to sit on chairs. But the thing is that we keep the spine straight and we project a certain awake quality with our body when we sit straight. We can take our our shoulders a little bit back, take chin a little bit in. We lower the gaze. We don't exclude the field of vision, so we don't close our eyes, but we lower the gaze because then there's less distraction. What else? We keep the jaw relaxed. If you need to breathe through the mouth, do that. There is sometimes also a little detail about putting your tongue up to the palate. You can do that. Hands on the knees, we say that is mind at rest. It's a mudra called mind at rest or mind at ease. Or the right hand on top of the left in the lap, that's called equanimity, resting in equanimity. That's also a mudra. So whatever is more convenient for us. Main thing really is that the body is, that we're comfortable. So even if we sit straight and all of that, shouldn't mean, not like we're having a poker up our rear or in any way sort of some militant, rigid way of sitting, but it is sitting straight. So there's a certain quality of wholeheartedness in that. We're participating wholeheartedly in where we are. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect is then the aspect of how we focus the mind, because the mind is drifting. And to just say, well, I won't be distracted, could be a little bit difficult, and it could really be something where we're not quite exactly sure where it is that we are not being distracted. Having something that we are focused on inevitably or effectively brings us back to something that is not conceptual, it's not caught up in our thinking. And that's where focusing on the breath is very, very helpful. Focusing on our breath actually takes us out of our heads. It takes us out of our thinking. We think and we're involved with a lot of things that we're concerned about. We're concerned about things that might happen, that have happened. We think about conversations we've had. We think about things that are taking place in our lives, but we're thinking, and we're not really relating to our whole being. We're not relating to the space that we're in. We're caught up with our thoughts. To actually break that cycle, we have, and to actually bring us back to being properly present, to actually yank us out of our heads, which is essentially yanking us out of a condition of distraction. We come back to something that anchors us in being present, and that's what we're doing then with the second point, which is bringing the mind back to the breath. And we recommend the out breath because that connects us to the wider space where we are. It connects us to the world, it connects us to the other. But it is something that's not conceptual, so it's not something that's philosophical or made from the mind or anything. It's a beautiful remedy for this condition of being essentially distracted and carried away by thoughts. And while thoughts can be helpful, we're not demonizing or in any way want to, how do you say, delegitimize thoughts. But the thing is, a lot of these thoughts, they revolve around very predictable and repetitive patterns, and they are generally very much thoughts about me in relation to the world. And so for us actually to get out of this pattern of our self-centering, meditation is interestingly what takes us a place where we could not be distracted by the self-centered narratives and rather begin to just be present. It doesn't necessarily mean that we right away have to think about, all sorts of other things, but just to break that pattern, break that distraction, break that involvement in some very repetitive regurgitations of familiar themes in our heads, then we have this grounding that comes from just coming back to the breath, and particularly then the out breath. There's something very beautiful about going out with the out breath that fuses our minds with a larger space. So effectively, we focus on the breath as it exits from our nostrils, then it fuses with space, and then we allow a gap. In-breath happens, and again, we proactively are attentive to the out-breath. Of course, we also hear and smell and so on, and also thoughts arise, but we could still sustain focus. So while thoughts might arise, we might not necessarily have to be distracted by them. And that takes us to the third point, which is then the way that we deal with the thoughts that arise. And that's where, if we have studied Abhidharma like we just have, we know that these realities that we operate with through our thoughts, they are constituted, they're dependent, they're contingent on causes and conditions, etc. And as such, they don't present themselves as monolithic, essential realities. They're simply just pictures and images and imaginations that are constructed on the basis of a number of causes and conditions. They don't have the reality they pretend to have. Essentially, we could say the Buddha is saying, don't believe every thought. But where we normally are just pulled in and absorbed and sucked in by these various thoughts, what we're doing with meditation is that we're acknowledging thoughts arise, and they're not a bad thing. Thoughts arising in our mind, in fact, we see as the spark of intelligence, but not in an intellectual way, simply just in an energetic way. The mind is not blank. The mind generates thoughts. And the moment that something is moving within our thoughts, we're alive. The thing is, what we do then is we fixate on particulars. And so with the practice of meditation, we allow thoughts to arise, but we also don't tag along with them. We don't get absorbed by them. We don't get distracted. That's a huge difference. That's where we're being discerning rather than just gullibly controlled by and sucked into the sort of condition of being absorbed by thoughts. So that's where the third point is to allow thoughts to be there as much as they like, but to not be distracted by them. And that's where it helps to have an overall attitude to whatever arises in the mind. Simply just say thinking. If you're a practitioner of the great perfection, Dzogchen, you would say display. But it doesn't really matter what you call it, Rolpa or Sal or things like that. But it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's just that we don't get absorbed by it. So it's not as if once you practice the great perfection, all of a sudden thoughts have a new legitimacy, particularly. It's just the same old, but we understand that, in fact, the spark or the power of the mind is such that it does display. But we, at the same time, we're still not enticed. And so we're all the time, we come back to this method of simply just labeling whatever arises as thinking. And that's where we are in no way suppressing, no way unconscious. We're aware of the thoughts, but we're also not gullibly kowtowing to them, being carried away by them, being sucked in. And as such, we begin to extract ourselves from the control that thoughts they have over us. It's a bit like a tyranny. Stephen was talking about revolution. Stephen and me, we belong to a generation that are big on revolutions of various kinds, so that's understandable. And we kind of like to think that we're still involved in revolution, so that's where the notion of overturning the tyranny, the hegemony of the mind is an appealing thought, and that's fine too. Whatever works for you. But for us, effectively, to achieve this autonomy, if you like, where we're not controlled by the mind, we need to have somewhere where we don't objectify and get sucked into the thoughts. And that's where this practice of meditation is very helpful. We call it shamatha, but it inevitably also comes with the dimension of vipassana, because it's in the discontinuing the ordinary, being absorbed by the thoughts, that we then also gain a wider perspective, which is what vipassana really means. Vipassana means, apart from that, it can be referred to as a method. Vipassana really means this wider perspective. And like Tongtse Rinpoche says, vipassana is the heart and blood of Buddhism. It is this discerning, this quality of seeing things clearly that is the core of everything the Buddha taught. We're not going to be free through going into a particular cosmic state. We're going to be free through seeing reality for what it is. So we're not free on the basis of running away or developing a strategy or something. We're simply just free through vipassana, through seeing. Just like if we see that a snake, in fact, is nothing but a rope. So looking is what sets us free. Seeing is what sets us free. The truth is what sets you free. Is that from the Bible? I don't know. So this term, the truth will set you free.
No, it's someone else.
It's sort of one of these.
Said that. I don't think it's biblical, but
it's one of the.
It goes back a long way.
Yeah.
It's been around for a while, yeah.
The
truth will set you free. Yeah. So that's lovely.
Oh, maybe it is even.
Yeah.
The mystics have been saying it for a long time. I'm sure that there's probably a translation of one of the Upanishads where they say something.
I guess so. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's probably everywhere. But it's such a relief, really, that we the material itself is good enough. It's like we're sitting on we bought a property and it turns out there's a gold mine in it. So we're actually we're well equipped. We don't need to trade in what we have. It's not like I don't want to be me. Actually, the me is the gold mine, and where we are is good enough. So this is where the liberation lies in what is, not in what we think ought to be. And it's through meditation then that we connect with that. So these three aspects: we have a posture, we have the focus, and we have this this perspective on the thoughts, that they're allowed to be there, but we don't get absorbed in it. And that's where coming back to the breath is very, very helpful. And then we do this in conjunction with this mystical phenomenon that we call blessing. And that is where we draw on an intuitive appreciation of enlightenment that we all have. It's curious that many of us, for example, are drawn to a skinny Indian man, a bald, skinny Indian man who was instrumental in Indian independence, namely Mahatma Gandhi. You know, but we kind of like this. We like that somebody managed to do things the way that Gandhi did it. We like the Dalai Lama. We like these persons. And if we were just robots, then we would just register, but we wouldn't actually have this, not just an appreciation in an emotional sense, but it actually provokes a spirit of intelligence, an intelligence that goes beyond the ordinary way that we rationally handle ourselves. So while the Buddhist teaching in general, of course, in some ways is very rational, we create calm, we create compassion, and all of these things, which of course are good. It's actually on the basis of seeing how these play out that we have a deep experience of their validity. It just feels right. And in the Buddhist teaching, we practice something called Buddha Anusmriti. Sometimes we talk about Triratna Anusmriti. Tenzin Rinpoche has been writing or collecting a practice of recollecting the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Here we use a text from Jamgon Mipam Rinpoche, which is called the Buddha. It's classified as something called Buddha Anusmriti, recollecting the Buddha, and it is very devotional. The point of this practice is recollecting the Buddha as someone that embodies our innate nature, but not just in an intellectual way, but very much in a way that is imbued with this proactive cultivation of deep respect. You know, when we extend our hand and shake hands with somebody, we're actually, with our body language and also implicitly with our attitude, we're opening ourselves up to someone. If you, in the Indian tradition, you fold your hands and say namaste, you actually are expressing a respect for the other person. Namaste actually means I salute the divine within you. And, you know, in Japan, you know, you bow to the others and so forth. There's all these different ways in which we open ourselves up. And the practice of Buddha Anusmriti is essentially creating the conditions for being present with enlightenment. We're not doing this as an exercise of idolatry, that the Buddha, we think of the Buddha as the savior, but we're thinking of the Buddha as someone that embodies the sanity that we have and yet that we often miss. So that's where invoking the presence of the Buddha is really something that enables us to connect to the abiding innate seed of enlightenment. So we do that with this practice, and then we dissolve. As part of the practice, we dissolve the external reference point to the Buddha. We consider that the light of the Buddha is innate to ourselves, and we settle in that, and that's where we apply then the meditation instructions that I was just going over. So that's what we're going to do. That's the plan.
There's a walking meditation for this one.
Oh yes, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, because I always forget. Okay, what we effectively will do is we'll chant, and then we'll do 35 minutes of meditation, where the first 15 minutes are sitting, and then we do 5 minutes of walking meditation, and then again we sit for 15 minutes. Now, walking meditation is like meditation where we focus on the breath, but instead of focusing on the breath, it's still shamatha in a way, but instead of focusing on the breath, we focus on the sensation of feeling the footstep. So that's where our attention goes back. Again, this is something that takes us out of our heads. So while we're sitting, we focus on the the breath, the out breath, and while we're doing walking meditation, we focus on the feeling of the footstep, the heel when it comes down, the down step, when we're down on the floor, the up step, and so on. But we're just aware of that. So in this way, this awareness constitutes what we call the object of mindfulness while we're doing the walking meditation. Okay, we'll take 2-minute break and then we'll begin. Thank you. Do you guys have the liturgy? I think there is.
Still got me. Still some possibility. Yeah. No, I can't do that. Never got that.
So there's a little quote from Samadhi. I always think almost Samadhi Sutra. I always it's in the Samadhi Sutra. It says those who while walking, sitting, standing, or sleeping recollect the moon-like Buddha will always be in the Buddha's presence. The colorful is the protector of the world. Whoever visualizes him like this practices the meditation of the Bodhisattvas. In keeping with this, we should practice remembering our incomparable teacher, the Lord of the Sages, in the following way. Then we take refuge. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. Ah, as the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offering, on a jewel-lion throne, and lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, lion of the Shaktis. His body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks. Clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture. His right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent, he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close sons, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the 2 extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues of body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teaching ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, am accumulating now, and will accumulate in the future, for the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space. May you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the 3 jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Te yata muni muni maha munaya soha. Te yata muni muni maha munaya soha. Te yata muni muni maha munaya soha. Deyatao muni muni mahamunaya 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 soha. Om 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 Muni Muni Mahamanaya Soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations, and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. Mm. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like them. And then a bit further down, the inspiration prayer of Maitreya. I'm struggling with my scrolling. We'll get there. Yeah, I should rely on paper, I think, but it's also for the online crew. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas endowed with the divine eye of the sages, and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all low realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my empty omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 levels, in all the direction of the world in the 10 directions, to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those, supreme among humans, to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away and those yet to come, may I train, following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dharma Dhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhists, the great sages, there are no truly existent sentient beings, no life force. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of a self. May I realize the Dhammatar where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping onto a self in mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules, and an ethics that is completely pure, with an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, wind remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of a hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the three gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the three times, and the three types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in a bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my attention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya, who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramita, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world, may the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadugani nignataha. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignataha. Tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignataha. Tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignataha. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.